Thanks, Jared. Yes, it truly is one of the most prestigious nights on the AFL calendar, for every player covets the title of being an All-Australian. The selection panel has already published the squad of the 40 best players of the year, 26 of whom were named for the very first time. All-Australian is a status in the game only achieved by the best of the best in any given year. An achievement, however, that will greatly define a player's career. So whilst tonight's team has no opponent, will neither win nor lose. For the players named in it, it will be one of the biggest victories in their footballing lives. Tonight, join me inside as we reveal which of those players will be named in the Virgin Australia 2014 AFL All Australian team. Yes, hello and welcome to the Virgin Australia 2014 AFL All Australian Awards, coming to you live from the exhibition buildings here in Melbourne. Shortly we'll cross to the CEO of the AFL, Gillon McLachlan, who'll introduce the All Australian selectors and they'll go through the team line by line. But before we do that, let's welcome our own team, who will play a devil's advocate role and go through the team line by line. Let's welcome, first and foremost, the doyen of AFL media in Mike Sheehan, Mark Robinson and Gerard Whateley from AFL 360. So we've got it covered, Mike, from all angles. Firstly to you, the status of an All-Australian player, where does it rate?
Well, Gerard, you've got 5 Blazers in the closet or in the garage at home. I can merely guess, but I can tell you one thing. When I was on the Hall of Fame selection committee, I attached a lot of weight to All-Australian selection.
It's always an interesting night, Robbo, sometimes controversial. Do you see any flashpoints?
Oh, not like 2 years ago when I'm sitting here talking about Nick Natanui and he's sitting down there. I'm not going to go near that again.
We're pleased about that.
I think the All-Australian should be a celebration. I mean, we've just been talking to Tommy Rockcliffe and Daniel Taylor, possibly 2 first-time All-Australians. You can see and feel the excitement from them. I think it would be a tremendous honour for a young player.
And Gerard, the story of the night, what's it going to be?
It'll be the perfect blend. There's more than half this team will be newbies. We know that because there are 26 of the 40 on the way through. But there are old stagers who'll be back after perhaps long absences, and then there'll be those who build on streaks, which is going to add to their legacy within the game.
Looking forward to your assessment at the end of the night. Let's get official proceedings underway as I welcome Gillon McLachlan, the CEO of the AFL, to introduce the All-Australian selectors. Welcome to you, Gil.
Thank you, Gerard. I'll be pleased to welcome and thank my fellow All-Australian selectors. On my right, I have Danny Frawley, Glenn Jakovich and Kevin Bartlett. On my left, Mark Evans, Luke Darcy, Cameron Ling and Warren Treadray. And Matthew Richardson is an apology. He has a date.
Well, good to see he's got everything into perspective. Let's begin with the full back line. Danny Frawley's been a selector since 2011. He was an All-Australian himself and a fearless leader, so he has got every right to have the great honour of announcing the full back line. Over to you, Spud.
No, thanks, Gerard. The foundation of any great team is the full back line. And in the back pocket, we have Essendon's Cale Hooker, Adelaide's Daniel Talia, and Sydney's Nick Smith.
Hooker, Talia and Nick Smith. Mike, why don't you open the batting?
Danny, Corey Enright has owned that small back pocket for about 10 years. Really pleased that the understated but highly efficient Nick Smith's got the role. He used to stand out as the small back pocket defender, isn't he?
He's been a standout, Mike, from all the selectors' point of view. 16 goals in 21 games. He's kept his opponents like Ballantyne and Lindsay Thomas 8 times goalless in his 22 games. So we thought he was a lock from day one.
Hey, Lingy, I can't remember the last time we had, I suppose, a lockdown defender like Nick Smith when you got in as a lockdown midfielder. I can't think of anyone since you're All-Australian where the selectors have rewarded a guy for perhaps not getting the ball but stopping the opposition.
Yeah, well, he does such a sensational role of it, Robbo. He stops those dangerous players that Spud just spoke about, but he's vital to that Sydney backline where blokes like Nick Malcheski and Reece Shaw and that can really run off and create an attack because of the role that he plays. So such an important player and very well deserved All-Australian.
So Robbo, what you're saying is Lingy's influencing the panel to bring it back a little bit.
So he should. I mean, we've had discussions in the past, and Mick, we've had him at work, and Jared on the couch and on 360 about where does Ryan Crowley sit in these positions when he cuts out the best midfielders every week.
KB, how great is it to see the graduation of a rising star from a couple of years ago to the full-back position in Daniel Talia?
Well, I think that's one of the great things about the rising star, because we see the best young players, and we do expect that to take place with rising stars to come through and then finally play in the All-Australian side. And Daniel Talia this year took on the very, very best week in and week out, and he's an outstanding young player. He's not one of the attacking defenders, but again, he does his job each week, and I think if you can limit outstanding players from having an influence on the game, then you're doing a great job for your club. And Daniel Talia this year was an absolute standout.
Danny, I must say, I see Daniel Talia as a centre-half back. You've named him full-back. To me, it doesn't bode well for Eric McKenzie.
Look, Daniel Talia plays on the best forward. So, regarding if he was centre-half forward, for example, he'd play centre-half back. If he was full forward, the best player, he would play full back. So, we'll have to wait and have a look at that half-back line, Mike, to see on that one.
Can I ask a question? When you're talking about the key defenders, do they go to you, Danny, and you, Jacko, to get a final say? Because that was your area of expertise.
Robbo, well, we look at the players' ability not only to shut someone down, but also attacking from the back 50, so get the ball themselves. So they do ask us from the panel, but I guess a general consensus this year was hotly contested, so we did have to go to a vote. Eric McKenzie, very unfortunate, but we had, Harry Taylor up there, Tom Lonergan, so we had probably 5 tall key posts that were in contention, and basically we only had the 2 positions. So we spent a fair bit of time on the full-back and centre-half back this year.
Well, whilst you're running hot, Jacko, you were an All-Australian in 94 and 95. You are the king of the West, so why don't you give us the half-back line?
Thanks, Jared. On the half-back line from the Sydney Football Club, Nick Malcheski at centre-half back. From the Richmond Football Club, Alex Ranson on the other half-back, Brodie Smith, Adelaide Crows.
Jacko, let me ask you about Rance. I'm happy for Rance to make it. I thought his second half of the season was outstanding. He missed 5 of the first 6 games. What weight do you attach to that?
Yeah, in the first meeting it wasn't mentioned all that much, Alex Rance, but he's... when you look at the team's performance, they won 9 straight, and he was a big reason for that. They played a lot of big sides like Sydney, Port, and he had the #1 key forward. A lot of weight amongst the selectors regarding not only closing those players down, but his influence in that back 30 where, you look to be threatened. He was getting a lot of the ball, very aggressive, his one-on-one posts, very strong, and then he was able to get his own football, which we like to see attacking defenders.
Warren, Nick Malcheski, this is uplifting. It's his 10th season. He's a 30-year-old. This is reward for sustained excellence. How did you view his season?
I thought he was brilliant. I thought Brodie Smith, the other one from Adelaide Footy Club, seen a lot of him play, but those guys in particular, #1 and 2 for defensive metres gained. They use the ball brilliantly, and every week they're getting tagged, and it's just been unfortunate that he was the one that's been out of the Sydney side the last few weeks. He sets them up in the back half, and I think the key bit is any opposition side has to look at Nick Malcheski, has to look at Brodie Smith, and they have to ask the question, how do we stop them having an influence and kicking the ball, because they start every offensive chain from deep inside back 50, and Nick Malcheski thoroughly deserves his spot.
Jacko, you're going to have to go back to Perth under the cloak of darkness. No McKenzie in either of the key defensive positions. He's got to be very unlucky.
Extremely unlucky, Mike, but, conceded 39 goals. Alex only the 23. Alex probably gets a bit more ball than he does. He's had 2 very consistent years. Extremely unlucky, a lot of debate. And for that position out of the 22, it was the only one that went to a vote.
Danny, 6 first-timers in defence. What does it tell us about the changing of the guard?
I think it's outstanding, Jared, that we've got 6 first-timers in the back line. It just shows the year that they've had and how far they've come since they've started their careers. Brodie Smith this time last year was sort of playing a few games here and there and going quite well. He's had an outstanding year, and to have 6 first-timers in the back line I think is outstanding and speaks volumes for those 6 guys.
Spud, there's a lot of stats around. Champion Data do a magnificent job. There's a new sexy stat about which is metres gained. How does metres gained compare to goals conceded?
Yeah, look, I'm a traditionalist, Jared. I think goals conceded in the back line is a must. You need to tidy up your own backyard before you can start worrying about other things. So I think I'm a little bit old-fashioned in that sense. But in saying that, I think that the run we've got from even Nick Smith, even though he's a negating defender, but Nick Malcheski, Alex Rance and Brodie Smith in that half back line, I think the ball will be in the forward half pretty quickly when they get the pill.
Good on you, Spud. We will move on now to the centre line, and it's a great honour for us to have a bloke who's been the anchor of the All-Australian selection panel for about 20 years, KB, to deliver the centre line. Welcome to you, Kev.
Thanks, Jared, and of course the centre line's so important. Nathan Fyfe from Fremantle had a fantastic season. Josh Kennedy from the Sydney Swans and Dyson Heppel from Essendon.
Kevin, I reckon this line would have taken you about 5 seconds.
I think you're right, Michael. I don't think we can get a better centre line than the one that we announced here tonight. Those 3 players have played fantastic seasons, and one of the great things, the easiest way to be selected in the All-Australian side is to have an outstanding year, so the selectors don't have to actually pick you. All we have to do is write your name up on the board. And those 3 players were so outstanding during the course of the season that that's all we had to do.
Ling, I asked you about being a stopper before. I've seen players go out there to try to slow down or interfere with Dyson Heppel. Why is Dyson Heppel still able to get the ball 25 to 30 times with that much attention on him?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Robbo. He just does it. He's one of those players, and similar to a Scotty Pendlebury, who we've loved for a number of years, who, when he gets the footy, it's like the game slows down. He just has so much time, great vision, really smart, really good hands, as you see there. I love the fact both him and Fyfe, and Josh Kennedy as well, but they have a balance of getting the footy. They don't just rely on it on the outside or on the inside. They can get it in all sorts of positions in the ground, and they also hit the scoreboard as well. And what a talent Dyson Heppel is. I think there's a few more times that we'll be reading his name out on All-Australian night.
And the same for Nat Fyfe, I'm sure. Luke, is he the complete package? Is he the archetypal midfielder at the moment?
I think so, Jared. I think there's no surprise the players voted him their player of the year, and some of the things that he does on a football field are unique. To be as tough, and his ability to win the contested ball is almost like no one else in the game, and yet on the outside he's as talented as anyone. He's a beautiful kick. He can stand on top of your head. He's just a complete player in every sense, and as KB said, he was one whose name was just locked on the board. You could not pick Nate Fyfe, and to watch him develop this year, he's turned himself into one of the most damaging players in the game.
One thing I noticed just with those 3 players, and I'd like to bring you in, Jared, if I can, they're all contested ball winners. They all win the hard ball, and we had a competition on superfooty.com this week, and 100,000 votes were launched, and Craig Bradley was a 9-time All-Australian, and I look at these midfielders, and they're different midfielders. They win their own ball kind of midfielders, whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, the outside running midfielder was so valuable. Linging again. You're our midfield general over there.
Well, yeah, you're right. And I think that's the secret of a really good midfielder, is those that can win their own ball. Because if you can't and you get tagged, well, the tagger just finds it too easy to stop you. You need to have that balance. But I think the really great ones can also hurt you on the outside, Robbo. They don't just rely on the inside ball. It's to have that balance in your game to make sure that any opponent who's playing on you is always kept guessing.
Mark, before you moved to the dark side and worked for the AFL, you were intimately involved with Hawthorn. It's a great football story that Josh Kennedy has become the great player he is. Tell us about the anguish you must have gone through in letting him move clubs.
Oh, it was certainly tough. Hawthorn had an outstanding midfield, and it was hard for Josh to push his way into that. He played 9 games at the back end of his last year at Hawthorn, and you could just see the work that he did around a stoppage. He's a bull. You can't stop him, you can't lay a glove on him, but he's also added to his work rate, and you see him getting possessions out in space now, which I think he's added to his game.
I want to ask you, you are the master at negating the good players. How would you attack the role of trying to nullify Josh Kennedy?
That's a very difficult question. I played on him earlier on when he was just first at Sydney, and I felt he was stationary at stoppages and you could kind of push him under and maybe control him a little bit. Now I see him on the move at stoppages, and he's such a big frame that people can't, even if they do get a hand on him, they're not really slowing him up. So he's got that momentum. As Mark just said, he's got those brilliant hands, he's got that great vision. He's just added things to his game now that makes him so hard to stop.
Don't whimper. The person who let him go was Jason Dunstall. And Dunstall's on the couch
right after
this show. So put it on him.
Ask him that, aren't you?
Put it on him. Dunstall's fault. And maybe Mark Evans as well. They were there. Evans and Dunstall.
He's still dirty that he was in the forward pocket of the All-Australian rather than a full forward. Warren Tredrose, a 4-time All-Australian. It's his first year on the panel, and he can read out for us the half-forward line. Warren?
Thanks, Jared. The All-Australian half-forward line. Port Adelaide's Robbie Gray. He's had a sensational year. Nick Riewoldt, again, a couple of years away from it. And Luke Bruce on the other half-forward flank.
This is the legacy one for me, with Riewoldt returning to the All-Australian team. He was last there in 2009. So perhaps for you, Warren, how did you separate them? How did you settle on Nick, and what does it mean to his standing in the game?
Well, to be truthful, Jared, it was an absolute nightmare to try and separate. If you look at Schultz, Hawkins, Franklin, and now Riewoldt. But we felt that we wanted to pick a team that played a set role. And Riewoldt, for a team that finishes in the bottom 8 and the bottom of the pile, was simply brilliant. From a leadership point of view, 2 from a kicking goals point of view, kicked 49 goals, but also plays as a half forward up high. You know, like the traditional mould of centre half forward. He took something like 39 more marks than anyone else in the competition. He had assists, he had the whole package, and we felt him playing as centre half forward would certainly complement the rest of the forwards you'll see unveiled in probably the next 5 minutes.
Gillen, what do you think it does to Riewoldt's place in the game? Sorry, that one? To Gillen.
Yeah, I think, Jared, it stamps him as one of the greats, certainly of the last 20 or 30 years. He, I know, was bitterly disappointed to miss last year, and it's a credit to the competitor that he is, that it still means something to him into his 30s. So he had an unbelievable year. As Warren said, he took so many more marks than anyone in the competition, and I think it's the sort of icing on his cake.
Luke Darcy, Robbie Gray, I mean, I think if we're all honest, he's taken us by surprise. He ended up as the coach's player of the year. We see him so often now because they're a good team and we watch him most weeks. He's a sensational player, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a star, and he maybe took that to another level in the final. 4 goals we saw on the weekend to get his side into a preliminary final, and it's nice to see someone in the side. In the past we've had midfielders maybe pushed to half forward, but he's a genuine goal kicker. When he did that knee injury going back a couple of years, I must admit I thought he would never really reach his full potential. So to come out and have the season that he's had, he was an absolute standout and a pretty easy selection at half forward.
Hey KB, you've been a part of these selection panels, and I and other people have been really a bit disappointed that you throw midfielders onto the half forward flanks. This year, the concerted push to pick, as Warren said, Riewoldt the centre half forward, Bruce one flank, Robbie Gray the high half forward on the other. I mean, how much of a real strong push was it to play people in those positions on the flanks especially?
What's happened sometimes in the past is obviously when you're picking the All-Australian side, you're looking for the creme de la creme. And as a result, some years, guys playing in those positions haven't had great seasons, and therefore you become very loath to actually pick someone in the All-Australian side who really hasn't had a great year. So sometimes in the past we've had to push up maybe one of those crack midfielders who have had sensational years. But this year, one of the nice things about this year is that players have played very well in their positions this year. And that's what we've seen with Robbie Gray. He's been outstanding. And Luke Bruce as the ace goal shooter for the Hawthorn Football Club. So in the past, sometimes we have pushed midfielders into those positions, but not necessarily this year.
You'd like Bruce. He doesn't like handballing, does he?
Well, it's a fad and it's a craze, and it's not going to last in the game.
Mark Evans, let me ask you about Luke Bruce. Luke Bruce is of Hawthorn pin-up, there's no doubt about that, and a beautiful kick for goal. Comes from a rugby league background. Has he surprised you?
Yeah, he did, and one of the things I think you noticed early on in his career, he had this amazing sidestep. He was 60 kilos rigging wet, but he's actually become a really strong player now in tackles, really hard to tackle as well, sidesteps really well, and incredibly accurate in front of goal, and had a great season.
Well, it's time to move on to full forwards, and I was looking over there for a Jason Dunstall or somebody who's kicked hundreds of goals, and Cameron Ling has been nominated a 2007 All-Australian, but he was a tagger, he was a midfielder. But I do remember Ling the days in the under-18s when you were one of the great full forwards. If you can read out the full forward line for us.
Channeling a bit of the olden days, Jared, thanks for that. The full forward line: Hayden Ballantyne from Fremantle, Lance Franklin from Sydney, and Hawthorn's Jared Roughead.
Lingy, you be careful on the way back to Torquay tonight. There's a bloke called Hawkins that's not in this team so far.
Yes, that's a fair point, Mike. As the guys said, it was hotly debated for those key position roles: Nick Riewoldt, Buddy Franklin, Jared Roughead, Jay Schultz, and of course Tom Hawkins. And we felt we could put three in those spots as three key forwards. And Buddy Franklin and Jared Roughead both had outstanding years. Buddy winning the Coleman, huge influence on games, but absolutely Tom Hawkins very, very unlucky not to take one of those spots.
Jared, I think one of the great stories of the year has been Hayden Ballantyne. We all know he had his problems in front of goal in last year's grand final, but this is a magnificent, I think, return to form, and it truly shows the character of the man.
Oh, I'm thrilled to see him in, and he clearly did enough to be the small forward in the pocket, and he had his challenges through the off-season, I'm sure, but he hit it with an absolute vengeance. And Glenn Jakovich, you'd see him a lot in the West. This speaks volumes of Hayden's character.
Yes, spent a bit of time with Hayden over the summer, and just to see his sheer disappointment from last year's grand final. He just at task over the pre-season, and the games that I saw Fremantle dominate, his defensive pressure, his ability to bring other players into the game, and without Michael Walters this year, he took a lot of that responsibility as a leader. So when you've got another ace in the side, it probably makes your job a bit easier. Well, Sonny Walters wasn't there for 18 weeks, so Hayden Ballantyne, the traditionalist forward pocket, very good, 49 goals, but very good defensively.
Hey, Gillen, from a football perspective, I'm sure you're like everyone else, and we love watching Buddy Franklin play. From an AFL perspective, what Buddy has done, what has that meant for the game north of the border?
Well, he's just been extraordinarily big in Sydney. He's as big as Lockett was, I think, and that's obviously translated into crowds in Sydney and helped their success. But he's just he transcends the game in Sydney, and as we try and consolidate and grow our share up there, he's been an extraordinary contributor, and he's had the year that everyone hoped he would, I guess, and he's been remarkable. And you only got to be up there to see when he gets the ball, as he did in that final. He kicked those two clutch goals against Fremantle, what he can bring to the team, but what he does to the crowd and what he does to football in Sydney.
Hey, Treaders, I remember Mick Sheehan, you talking about Warren Tredrea as probably the predominant key forward through 4, 5 and 6, or 3, 4 and 5. Does that ring a bell?
I was very flattering towards Treaders, wasn't I?
Treaders, as much as Mick was in awe of you, how much are you as a key forward in awe of what Lance Franklin has been able to rediscover this year?
Oh, he's on another level. I witnessed the game when Port Adelaide played Sydney, and if it wasn't for Buddy Franklin, he had 5 points at half-time. He kicked 5 goals straight. He won that game. The place was just out of control, and we hadn't seen that in Sydney for a couple of years. And the game he's got, and I worried a little bit with the recruiting, whether you'd see his contested marking back. It's back to as good as it's ever been. His movement's as good as it's ever been. His goal kicking's as good as he's ever been. And for me, he is clearly the #1 forward in this competition by a long way.
Mike, can you give us some perspective historically? I lived through the Kappa era, played with him. You watched from afar, and his impact was phenomenal. It was then superseded by Tony Lockett and now Franklin. If Franklin can take the Swans to a flag, and we know he's got another 8 years to get that done, where is he going to sit? My gut feeling is he could become the greatest influence in the game of all
Sydney?
time.
No, I think you're right on that, and I'm surprised. I lived through the Lockett stuff and thought that he actually almost carried football on his back up in Sydney for a long time, but he's transcended that. And as you say, if they were to win the flag, I mean, it's going to be a major coup.
Jared, why do you think he has been able to do that in Sydney? Was it always natural that it would happen?
I'm not sure about that, Jared. I get the feeling it was because he almost had a stumbling start, but he didn't have a crack back at anybody. He copped a lot of criticism.
No, he's
His
happy.
form wasn't great, but after about round 4 or 5, he started to blossom. And everybody's jumped on the Buddy Franklin bandwagon up in Sydney. Sydney. Just one final one to you, Jared. He was supposed to be going to GWS. The story was written, it would seem, by the AFL. He goes to the GWS. Is he better for football in Sydney as a Swans player or a GWS player?
This year, for the short term, as a Swans player, because he's led them to, or he's been part of huge success and building, and that will be the case for 2 or 3 years.
Just before we leave this full forward line and the fascination with Buddy, which is totally justified, Kevin Bartlett, Hayden Ballantyne's in the forward pocket, and rightly so, but did he just nut Eddie Betts? I think Eddie's season's been undersold.
No doubt about that, Mike. We had 2 terrific little forward pocket players this year. Eddie kicked 51 goals, 49 goals to Hayden Ballantyne. So it was very tough between those 2 players, but Hayden is a pocket rocket, and I thought, and so did the panel, that he played an extraordinary season. He's an antagonistic player as well. He takes a lot of opposition attention. He kicks some brilliant goals. He's a great tackler, and he got the nod.
Hey, Das, how much did versatility play a role in Ruffy's selection?
We certainly spoke about it, Robbo, and part of the criteria is a side that can play. And even though Ruffy didn't take any centre bounces this year, he played as a tall ruck rover, as you know, Robbo, a fair bit of the time. But you look at that side and you think, you could play him as a ruck rover. If someone went down, you could play him at centre half back. He could play the key position on his own. And he another great year. He kicked goals. He kicked big bags of goals at times. And it was hotly debated. Tom Hawkins was very stiff not to get that role. And you could look at right throughout the side, there were players that were putting their hand up. But I thought Joe Ruffedge was outstanding, and the role he plays is pretty important.
We'll keep it rolling, Luke. You were 2002 AFL Ruckman of the Year, and you are given the responsibility of giving us the midfield.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. The 2014 Ruckman from the Fremantle Dockers is Aaron Sandilands. The superstar from Geelong, Joel Selwood. And from the Gold Coast Suns, Gary Ablett.
Well, you don't get 3 bigger names than those.
Next.
Firstly, Mike, can you find a flaw in any of those?
Das, you're a ruckman of note. How would you tackle Sandilands? You can't wrestle with him and you can't jump over him. What do you do?
With a great deal of fear, Mike. I had the opportunity to play on him late, and you used to think maybe I could outrun him and I could take him to parts of the ground where he'd be in trouble, but underestimate his ability to run at your own peril. He covers the ground unbelievably well for the biggest player in the history of the game. He's the heaviest player in the history of the game, and some of the vision you're seeing there, when he is on top, he has maybe more impact on the game than anyone else. He played a great final on the weekend just to show us again the quality that he has. It was a pretty hotly debated position, a bit more than maybe you would think. There was a fair bit of debate about some of the other players. Sam Jacobs had a great year, Paddy Ryder had a great year, and Shane Mumford came into contention, but I think Sandilands was the first choice by the panel.
So specifically, how did you separate, say, Sandilands and Jacobs, Luke?
Just on his impact, Jared. Just on the fact that he has more impact on the game, we felt, consistently than the other 4 players that we spoke about.
When you pick, who's the number 1 and number 2? Kevin Bartlett, who's the number 1 and 2 midfielders? Is it the centreman and the rover, or is it the ruck rover and the rover? Did you vote like Selwood and Ablett?
Well, the rover, of course, has always been number 1. We know that.
So Gary's
the rest just fall into in behind him.
How much consideration to the mismatches from Gary?
Gary Ablett is the greatest player in the game, and probably, arguably, maybe the greatest player we've ever seen. He only played, the 15 games this year, but they were a cracking 15 games, and there's a very good chance even with 15 games he might be more than capable of even winning the Brownlow medal. But it was, I know there was a lot of talk about only playing the 15 games, but his selection in the side was unanimous that Gary Ablett is the greatest player in the game, even with 15 games, had to be in the All Australian side.
Gil, is there a cut-off point? I mean, could you be Gary Ablett and play out your best and play, say, 12 games and still be in contention?
Well, 12 games, you could be cut short with 12 games.
Well, I guess the way we looked at it, Mike, was to say you got to pick the team. If he coming into the season he's only going to play 15, would you still pick him? That's what we considered, and everyone said unanimously yes. His 15 is so good, we'd take him anyway, knowing that he was going to miss the 7 games.
Cameron, this is 8 in a row for Gary Ablett. What does it say about his legacy in the game?
Yeah, not a bad player, Jared, is he? He's just fantastic. 15 games or not, every game that he plays in, he gets heavily tagged. A lot of attention from the opposition, not just from the tagger, and somehow he's taken his game to a whole new level. And I was one who put my hand up at the time when he left Geelong and thought, oh, maybe he'll drop off a little bit because he doesn't have the help of the Bartels and Joel Coreys and these guys. But unbelievably, he has gone to a whole new world up there at the Gold Coast, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he can hold on and win a Brownlow. That'll be an exciting night on Monday night. But yeah, what a wonderful player, and 8 times All Australian, and I'm sure he's got a few more left in him as well.
No apologies going back to UKB. You've seen a lot of the great tough midfielders, as we'd call them. Where would you rank Joel Selwood with that group?
Well, we rate him pretty highly, and I've always thought Joel Selwood, from day one since he actually came into the Geelong Football Club side as a young player, has just shown tremendous leadership, his ability to win the ball, plays big games, plays big quarters, plays big halves, beats good players, gets a lot of attention. I know a lot of people, talk about ducking the head, but I just think he's such an extraordinary player, puts himself in very, very tight situations, and if you're good enough to roll the shoulders and you get the free from time to time, if you want to tackle him around the shoulders, well, you do it at your own peril because he's very, very strong. But he's one of the best midfielders we've seen for a long, long time, and who knows, maybe he might tie with Gary for the Brownlow medal.
He's tough everywhere, Robbo, except the eyebrows. They're a little bit
He's
weak.
a bleeder,
We've
Jared.
found his weakness. Okay, that's the 18 spots filled on the ground.
Now,
Mike,
Jared,
who's yet to get in and who has to be in?
There are 4 spots left, and there are 20 blokes who have got undeniable claims.
Give us one nomination.
Well, I hope Luke Parker's in it, because he's going to be in one of the 3 best players in the best team in the competition in the home and away series.
Robbo?
I'll be staggered if Brent Harvey's not in the team. I reckon I saw him win 4 to 5 games himself. He was winning every second Sunday.
There's a few frowns over there, Robbo. Few frowns on the selection panel.
Jared, I've still got hope for another ruckman, and what about yourself?
No, I'll walk off if Jordan Lewis doesn't make it.
Okay, so
We don't want you
One
to
for the family.
there's a few reputations on the line. We're going to take a break. More Virgin Australia 2014 AFL All Australian team coming up straight after this. Welcome back to the Virgin Australia 2014 AFL All Australian Awards. Jared, just going across the numbers, 11 of the 18 so far nominated are debutantes. You said that would be the story of the night.
And then the streaks, Ablett with 8, Revolt 5, Franklin 5. Revolt first time since 2009, Sandylands first time since 2010. And the Swans have the bragging rights, 4 of the 18 field positions.
Do you think there should be 2 ruckmen in, Mike, or is a roughhead secondary ruckman suffice?
We're not playing anyone, so I think you don't need the backup. You don't need the insurance, and Ruffy can play in the ruck. I can live with that.
Okay, let's find out what the final 4 spots are. Mark Evans is the footy operations manager of the AFL, and he's got the final 4 nominations. Mark?
Thanks, Jared. It was pretty tough to pick the bench. Starting off, Jordan Lewis from Hawthorn Football Club, Scott Pendlebury, Collingwood, Travis Boak from Port Adelaide, and Tom Rockcliffe from the Brisbane Lions.
Now, boys, not a query with any of those. They're all outstanding players who had outstanding years, but is Matty Priddis ever going to be acknowledged for being the fact that he gets 30 possessions, hard won every week?
Come on, Jakovic.
Come on, Jakovic. You've got no one in. You've got no McKenzie and no Priddis, Jacko. You're
Thanks,
staying in
Mike.
Melbourne.
Thanks. I am going back to Perth tomorrow, so they'll be waiting for me. But Matthew Priddis probably win his 2nd best and fairest. 3 years prior to that, he was runner-up as the best and fairest. So he's had 4 or 5 consistent years. Extremely unlucky. That was the bottom line. Hotly debated, went to a vote as well. The only, I guess, a little criticism for him is that a lot of his possession backward of the centre, not a lot of inside 50 penetrations. Only kicked the 9 goals. When you look at the elite midfielders, they're kicking 15 to 20 goals. So that area of his game was a discussion point.
Well, the good news, Jared, is you didn't have to do a walkout.
I asked this to Mark Evans. What have you observed in the coming of age, the maturing of Jordan Lewis, which has delighted us all?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Jordan, obviously, since he was a young lad, and he's worked so hard. I think people have to understand he's such a competitive beast, never wants to be beaten in anything, and has really set himself to improve his game. It's absolute leadership quality written all over him, and you can see how hard he works now in the midfield, and when he gets the ball, something usually comes from it. 5th or 6th for the league in disposals, and really high in score assists as well.
How much do you think AFL 360's helped his football this year, mate?
I missed the question, sorry.
AFL 360, how much do you think that's contributed to his career best form?
I've no doubt it's polished him off quite well, and you can see he's far better rounded now.
Das, when we're talking about, when I hear Mark describing Jordan Lewis, couldn't we be saying the same thing about Luke Parker?
Yeah, absolutely. And Luke Parker, I mean, we're going to say this about everyone that you mentioned. He was, if he wasn't next in line, he was certainly close behind. Sean Burgon, I felt was really stiff. I tried to mount a case for Sean Burgon. I thought he had a massive year. And Glenn Jakovich threw one of the great tantrums, I have to say, about Matthew Prittis and Eric McKenzie. Our last meeting went for 5.5 hours, an hour and a half with Jacko saying, I can't go home unless I get someone back in.
Hey, Spud, we've got 4 midfielders on the bench, and I'm with Mick. You can't deny the 4 of them. How much did you work to get a McKenzie in, a second ruckman like a Jacobs, another forward like a Tom Hawkins? Why did you settle on 4 midfielders on the bench?
They were the next best 4 players, we thought, as a whole, and the impact in the games. You know, Tommy Rockcliffe, for example, the 5th highest average per disposals per game ever. 33 disposals. I thought he had an absolutely outstanding year. Suspended twice, played 18 games, and still only had 550 possessions. So he had his latter half of the season. I think 5 out of the 7 games was over 40. We know he can go forward, but he was just a ball magnet in the middle of the ground, and just weight of numbers in the end got him over the line.
When Port started, they were, I think, around 14, Jared and Jared. They were on top of the ladder, Port Adelaide, and you look at them and say, geez, they've got a good spread of talent. But Treaders, they had one player who leads, and that's Travis Boak. And I don't think there's one person following football right now who would think that Travis Boak doesn't deserve a spot beside, the best players in the country.
Yeah, if anything, he'll probably finish just behind Robbie Gray and Port Adelaide's best and fairest. But the key thing is he's had as good a year as he did last year when Port Adelaide bolted from nowhere. And the thing is this year, his leadership has just been unbelievable. Key moments when they need to lift, he's been the one that kicks goals. He influences the play. He takes them on from the front. And to add better, the thing is, away from this, and this has got nothing to do with selection, he's an absolute A-grade person and he gets the best out of himself. And he's the big reason. His commitment to Port Adelaide has been the reason why they've turned it round. A lot of blokes follow, and the way he plays his football, he thoroughly deserves any credit he gets.
Gil, in the past, versatility was a major asset. This year, I suspect it's cost Sean Burgoyne because he's just so good at so many different roles, but he's not a specialist in any one of them.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, Mike. He was I mean, everyone's claiming the 23rd man, but I have to say it's probably Sean Burgoyne. In the end, his ability to play so many positions probably did cost him a little bit, although Jacko was still plugging away for Eric and Matthew Prittis.
You can go home now, Jacko.
No one worked harder than Glenn to be able to go home with his head held high.
KB, can I ask you about Boomer Harvey? You played till you were just under 40. You're one of the few people in the world who knows just how tough it's been for Boomer to get that old body to such a high level again. He must have been brutally close.
He was. I mean, we all know Boomer is a fantastic player, and I've heard the news that he's got off and he's playing in the preliminary final, so that's great news for North Melbourne, also for the game as well. Had a terrific season. I suppose he's played a fair bit up the ground as well. He's kicked a number of goals this year. I think around about 25 or 26 goals for the season. But he didn't actually get a role in the, with Bruce and also with Hayden Ballantyne with those, specialist positions. So it came down then, obviously, he's up against the likes of, Pendlebury and Tommy Rockcliffe, and we've heard about his extraordinary season. So in the end, he got squeezed out.
Well, it's a great honour to get into the All-Australian side. To be nominated as one of the leaders is an even higher achievement. Let's find out who the leaders are. Gillen, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jared. The captain of the 2014 Virgin All-Australian side is Geelong's Joel Selwood, and the vice-captain is Nick Riewoldt of St Kilda.
Gil, try as I might, I can't query either of those. Tick for both.
Yeah, I think so, Mike. I have to say this one wasn't debated a hell of a lot. Joel Selwood, just as Kevin said earlier, he's in the middle of everything, and I think if you look at the last two finals, the selection's vindicated by his game, both against Hawthorn, then against the Kangaroos. He was leading from the front, in the middle of everything. Apparently he was All-Australian again tonight at the Tribunal. And Nick Riewoldt, 5 times All-Australian now, and to come back and India 30s for a team finishing on the bottom of the ladder, to be competing like he did, more marks than anyone in the competition by a mile, and leading that young side, head held high. I think there wasn't a lot of debate about these two.
Jared, we were talking about Nick Riewoldt before coming on air tonight, and it's a great challenge when you are playing as he has done in a bottom side, when he has essentially been the leader of one of the premiership favourites for the best part of a decade, and yet he's enhanced his reputation this season.
He's done it with such honour, and he did it last year as well. I think he's been epic. His first 4 came in teams when he was leading St Kilda out onto the MCG at the pivotal moments of the season, but to find the motivation to do it, to find the excellence to uphold his own standards and to drive those with him, while they're not winning very often comparative to the best moments of his career, I think that is telling for his legacy in the game.
Jared, one of the highlights for me last year was your spring carnival type assessment of each of the players. Can you run us through the team as it sits at the moment?
So the 2014 All-Australian team from the back line, and the sponsors will be happy. It's a virgin back line, all first-timers. Cale Hooker from the Dogs. Daniel Talia graduates from Rising Star to fullback. The Smiths make names for themselves. Nick in a back pocket from the Swans, and Brodie on a half-back flank from the Crows. Alex Rance claims something for the momentum of the Tigers in the second half of the season, and Nick Malcheski proves that everything comes for those who wait. Nathan Fyfe, Josh Kennedy and Dyson Heppel, excellence. Heppel, again, another rising star to find his way to the All-Australian team. Robbie Gray from Port Adelaide, the high half-forward. Nick Riewoldt, the great, at centre half-forward, and Luke Bruce, the accurate one. Hayden Ballantyne in the forward pocket. Lance Franklin is 5th. He's first as a Swan, and even though he doesn't play with Jared Ruffhead anymore, there they are, side by side, Batman and Robin again. Aaron Sandilands wins the ruck, his return for the first time since 2010. Joel Selwood back-to-back as captain. Gary Ablett, 8 straight years. And on the bench, Jordan Lewis from Hawthorn, Scott Pendlebury and Travis Boak. There's only 5 who retained their positions from last year. Boak and Pendlebury, 2 of those. And Tommy Rockcliffe, a breakthrough for the Lions.
And here are the present members of the Virgin Australia All-Australian team for 2014. Clearly missing a number of players who have finals duties coming up in the prelim finals. But boys, it's a magnificent assembly of great AFL talent.
It is, yeah. And look, the Brownlow might be the most prestigious individual award, but I think those blokes are bursting with the pride you'd have if you'd won a Brownlow.
Rubber, how do you assess the selectors' performance?
Oh, no, pretty good. Really good. I mean, God, it's the toughest gig in football, picking the All-Australian team. You're right, Jacko. I feel for you. I really do.
Hey, don't let Lingy off the hook.
You know, Tom Hawkins is stiff. I mean, what happens? You pick the team, and then we see these magnificent finals performances, and you think, God, how can you leave that guy out of the team? And Tom Hawkins was one of them. But every single one of those players deserve their spot, and they should be really, really proud.
It's a beautifully balanced team,
yep.
So we can quibble over which players in which positions, but I think that's as good as I've seen as a presentation of the players in their positions.
The only query I'd have on it, Jared, is that there are so many good players who aren't there, but there was no one there that you'd say doesn't deserve the honour.
I've got a suspicion that the Ruck Union needs to get a presentation. I know
That's Darcy's fault.
I know Darcy would have been bidding for a second ruckman, but I reckon you need to up the ante for the Rucks, particularly in the overall squad of 40, Darcy.
You think we need 2, Jared?
I do. I think there was a couple there at this stage.
We've only got 1.
Well, I think we did the right thing with Aaron Sandilands.
Well, that's it from the Virgin Australia 2014 AFL All-Australian team. It'll be debated, it'll be argued, but what can't be denied, it's a fantastic side that represents the AFL. Stay tuned, though, on the couch to follow here on Fox Footy.
Well done, gentlemen. Good job, mate.